Located in Moundsville, West Virginia, is the old West Virginia State Maximum Security Prison. Now, this prison has a long and sometimes violent history. Prisoners were murdered in their cells by other inmates during riots, and most notably, they were put to death in the electric chair. Old Sparky, who was built by an inmate from that facility. The prison is now closed, but you can still tour it, and if you're brave enough, even spend the night there, of which I planned on doing once I returned stateside. This story concerns the daylight tour I took of the facility while I was a corrections officer with the state of West Virginia. Once we had received our initial briefing about the facility, we were allowed to tour it on our own and pretty much go wherever we wanted, even places the public wasn't allowed. While touring the facility, I was in a section of the prison known as the Sugar Shack, supposedly where some of the worst offenders were housed. I was the only person in the section of the prison at the time, and while I was up on the third tier inspecting some of the old cells, when down below me the cell doors slammed shut. Now, this wouldn't have come as much of a surprise to me if it weren't the fact that all the doors had been closed at once, which is what they are supposed to do. But they are controlled by a lever from the central location, which IQ. I left that section of the prison and made my way down to the basement and the location of the hole. This was the place they say drove some inmates mad. While in the basement, I kept having the feeling of someone following me. And as I grew near to the hole, a feeling of dread and despair almost overwhelmed me. I kept my senses though, and started to make my way deeper into the basement. I caught a glimpse of a figure, just in the shadows, moving from right to left. That should have brought them into the light, what little there was, but they never appeared, and I didn't see them go the other way. Once again, I took it as a cue to leave. I went from there to the medical and dental ward of the facility. No physical events took place here, just a sense of foreboding over the area. This has all led me to believe that something is still behind the walls of this prison, and that they may never be able to leave. I'm gonna do an all-night ghost hunt of this facility, and I plan on taking some video and audio equipment and see if I can capture anything on film or tape. This is my third submission, currently about where I have lived in the last 2 years. West Virginia has a lot of spirit activity. I rent an apartment in an old house built in 1930. The house has 4 apartment units. My apartment is upstairs and is a small 2-room efficiency. My bedroom leads to the attic upstairs but is blocked off. Most of the apartment is modern except for the old, thick doorways, which must have originally been bedrooms leading to other bedrooms. It all started last March in 2007. I'd lived there for about 7 months and nothing strange at all. It was quite nice for a change. I was pregnant at the time and was relaxing, watching TV in the bedroom. From my bedroom, a small hallway leads into the kitchen. I felt a presence appear in the hallway, and seconds later, I heard music. I'd kept an old music box in the kitchen, but hadn't wound it up in years, literally. It just sat there collecting dust. At first, I wasn't sure what the music was because the TV was a little loud. I muted the TV after a minute, and I walked into the kitchen. Sure enough, the music box was playing, and after a few seconds more, it stopped. I smiled, feeling as if I had a visit from my deceased mother. Immediately, I called my aunt and told her about my experience. Days later, I had forgotten about what happened, until I was on the phone with her again, and the music box began to play. This time I had a witness, and I didn't feel like a crazy ghost-attracting lady. She heard the song and identified the song strangely enough, being a musician. It played for the longest time and we giggled on the phone together. Someone was visiting, for sure. Later that summer, my landlord was making major repairs in the house. Days after the work began, I would wake up in the middle of the night and heard long rapping or knocks. I started to hear voices when I walked into the apartment as if a conversation was going on. At night, I would hear a baby whimper or cry in the distance, even though my newborn was fast asleep. Strange things happened, and I read when major repairs or restoration is done to a house, spirit activity will happen. It is an old house and has seen a lot of occupants, good energy, and bad energy. This story is similar to some of the things I've read on this site. It took place in Huntington, West Virginia. My husband and our child were living in an apartment complex. One day while my husband was at work, I went to check on my daughter. She was about 2.5 years old. When I walked through the hall, I heard laughing, thinking that maybe the TV was on in my room, and I had just forgotten to turn it off. Well, my TV was off. I found it odd, and needless to say, I was a little freaked out. When I approached my daughter's room, she was sitting on the floor, playing with her ball. She rolled it to the other side of her room, where I could not see it. And then it rolled back. When it rolled back, I heard the same small child laughing. My daughter started giggling too and said, "You're silly." I have no idea who she is talking to. Later that day, she came out of her room and I asked her who she's been talking to. She told me, the girl. I asked her about the girl, what she looked like, and she said, "The girl in the white dress, Mommy." I asked her what the girl's name was, and she said that she didn't know. I told my husband about what I witnessed after we put our daughter to bed that night. He is also a very strong believer in the paranormal, as he had had experiences. A few minutes after I told him what was happening to our daughter, she came out of her room and said, "The girl won't leave me alone, I want to sleep." Being concerned parents, we took her back to bed and tried to console her. She was very upset. After my husband plugged her nightlight back in, I don't know how it got out, I looked and I saw an indentation on her bed in the shape of a small child sitting. I just took my husband's arm and kind of pointed towards the bed and whispered to him about the indentation. I was very freaked out. I asked my daughter if the girl was still in her room, and she said, "Mommy, she's sitting on my bed." I almost started to cry. I was so flipped out about this. After that, I calmed myself and asked the girl to please not come at night to my daughter because she needs her rest, and she can play with my daughter when she's awake. We have since moved from there, and my daughter is 6 now. Finally, one day, about a week before we had to move, she came to me and said, Ruth says that she'll miss me and she wants to come to the new house. I told her that Ruth could come, but she has to behave. My daughter said she no come, she has to stay with her mommy and daddy. Very surprised, I said, okay, maybe she can spend the night sometime. This pleased my daughter, and when we left for the last time, my daughter told Ruth goodbye and come visit us in the new house. It was Easter Sunday, 1992. I was 7 years old. All of my mom's brothers and sisters and their children had gathered at my maternal grandmother's house like usual. After lunch, the adults had an egg hunt for all the kids. Anyway, the egg hunt was over, and all my cousins and I were headed to the backyard to collect our prizes. For some reason, I stopped about 20 yards short of the group and stared at the hillside. The back of my grandmother's backyard was, and still is, lined with forsythia bushes. The bushes were not in full bloom, but were starting to bloom. From what I remember about the sun, it had to have been about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, as I stared into this bush, this white shape, neither solid or transparent, started forming out of nowhere. It seemed to be spinning, while it expanded and contrasted. At this time, I became aware that there was a very tall presence behind me. Almost touching me, I could feel the body heat. I thought the presence was my older cousin, who was a teenager and twice my height. So I spun around and said, "Lee, look at that!" And spun back around. Instantaneously, I realized that Lee was not behind me and never had been, and the white blob was gone. I felt alone again. I looked over and realized my family was some distance off and had not seen or noticed a single thing. I think it needs to be said now that I am very skittish. I'm terrified of the dark and always have been. Just the thought of possibly seeing a ghost or demon or presence scares me. I've always been like that. However, in this situation, I was calm. More than calm, I was serene. I know at some point in time, I told my mother, grandmother, aunt, and father about this. For a long time, they tried to convince me that I just saw a cat or a grocery bag in the wind. I always maintained that it was an unknown form. Years passed, and my mother would occasionally bring up the topic with me to see if I remember anything else. My story has always been the same. However, she pointed out something about 6 months ago that I had never realized. For years, I had put an emphasis on the blob. It had never occurred to me that I had not been mistaken about my cousin's presence behind me. Perhaps I just couldn't see the presence. She suggested that the presence could have been her father. He had died when my mother was 5 or 6. My mother and I are practically identical. So much so that in my adult life, I've seen pictures of her and thought they were me. My mother suggests that the presence was her father just checking up on his little girl. For some reason, this helped put the mystery of why I saw the blob to bed. Now I feel like I understand, or at least have a more complete understanding. Since I was little, strange things have happened to some parts of my family. It started before I was born. When my older brother was about 2 or 3, my mom would say he would talk to thin air. They thought it was our great-grandfather. Since my brother was named after him, it turns out that she was wrong. After I was born, things got even worse. One time when my sister was babysitting me, I saw a white figure blocking the hallway, so I could not get to my sister. Then one night in December, my mom had hung bells in one of our door-free doorways. The next thing we know, my brother came running into the bedroom my sister and I shared, saying that the bells just started swinging by themselves and fell. I would have these awful nightmares that seemed so real. It all cooled down after that for a few years. When I was 9, things heated back up. My friend and I were sitting on our couch. It faced the kitchen. It was around 8 and my mom went to the gas station across the street. When all of a sudden our huge pot got thrown across the kitchen and hit our fridge. We tried to find a logical explanation, but we couldn't. At first we said it was the wind, but this thing is huge. Even the wind could not have blown it across the kitchen like that. Plus, the windows were closed. These things only seemed to happen to my friends and I, my brother and my mother. My brother would hear things in his room. My mom would smell things. But my friends and I seemed to get the blunt of it. We would be doing nothing when things would fall off shelves, our lights would go off. Things would be thrown across the room. We even saw a hand once. Once I reached 11, things cooled down once again, but would not stop entirely. I was still plagued with these nightmares. I would have to sleep with someone because I would hurt myself in my sleep. When I was 14, things got real bad. And never really stopped, but for a few short months. The nightmare still occurred. My friends would be staying, and that's what it was worst of all. One time, 2 of my best friends and I were in my room when we saw a light outside. We thought it was from our house lights, so we turned off all the lights except for the TV. Then looked back out and saw that the light was still there, but moving. It was too big to be a flashlight and headlights from a car. We ran into my bathroom and hid there for about 2 hours. When we came back out, it was still there. The only thing that ever happened to my sister was the most gross. She and her boyfriend were sitting in our room when thousands of ants came piling out of our walls. It was insane. When I turned 16, that's when things got even worse. I had a new boyfriend, and since my mom had to work a lot of nights because of her job, she would let him stay over. Plus, we were good kids and very trustworthy. Well, it was early in the morning one day that my boyfriend had stayed, and we were both laying in bed when I heard this awful whimpering near my heater. I started panicking, thinking that my dog Bear had been hurt. When my boyfriend said the dog was laying on the other side of him, yet he said he heard the whimpering too. Thinking it was coming from outside since my heater was placed under my bay window, we went out to search for the hurt dog. We went outside and there were no dog prints in the snow. We decided to go back in, and the whimpering could still be heard from my wall, which was made entirely of brick on that side of my room. Things like this happened on and off. When I was 17, we had got a new dog. Bear had run away. It was late, around 2 in the morning, when my boyfriend went to take our dog pee. Well, I heard our front door open, then footsteps into my room. Then a pressure on his side of the bed. Thinking it was my boyfriend, I turned around to give him a kiss, when I saw nothing was there. There was a dent in the mattress from where somebody was sitting, but you could not see it. It stayed there until my real boyfriend came inside. Then 2 months later, when I turned 18, the ghost finally let me see it. I was sleeping when I heard a glass break from across the room. I woke up thinking it was our dog. When I looked where the sound had come from, I noticed a man. He looked to be about 6 foot. He had salt and pepper hair, which is black with a little white coming through. He had a white shirt with black pants. These pants had overalls that had gold buttons on them. Now the clothes looked so old-fashioned. I went back to sleep because I thought it was a dream. I guess he got angry about this because a month later, I had the worst nightmare yet. It seemed like I had awoken in my room and everything looked the same, but the light was on. My boyfriend was asleep beside me. Then a sudden panic came over me. I tried to move, to tell my boyfriend, but I couldn't move. When the old man leaned over my face and was laughing at me, I felt tears coming out of my eyes from lack of oxygen. Then I woke up for real, gasping for breath. It's just, this thing scares me. I have had a lot more experiences that I'll write about later. Some things I even probably forgot to put in here. What I want to know is if it just hates me because it comes after me more than any others. That's it for these West Virginia ghost stories. They were really short. I tried to find longer ones, but I only found the last one that was the longest one. It was a pain in the butt. I tried. Let's see. Secret word for the video will be orange. Have I picked orange before? Probably not. Put like the orange emoji of the orange down there, or just say orange, or give me like an orange joke like orange you glad. You know what I mean? Do some puns down there. Do something. But as always, ghouls, my last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.